Hey, everybody out there. This is David Rovix. Sorry to keep you waiting. We meant to begin at the top of the hour, and it's actually 8 minutes past. But I might have a co-host with me soon, but I'm not sure. In any case, we're just going ahead with the show, no problem. And there's a little edition of Song News Network Presents, but basically it's a discussion show where we interview various guests related to the arts in one form or another. And today we are spending the hour with Tayo Aluko, who has recently written a fantastic musical audio radio play called Paul Robeson's Love Song, and which I have just misidentified on the banner on the bottom uh, of this broadcast in a very not love story, love song, and with no further ado, let's just bring Tayo onto the screen before we lose any viewers who are starting to get bored with my lengthy introduction. People tell me you got to keep these things snappy. You can't be like going on and on about platforms that you're on and all this kind of stuff. You got to just like get into the discussion, David. I did a broadcast yesterday where I talked for 8 minutes before I actually said anything of substance, and I thought, what? Why? Tayo,
well, here I am.
Here you are. Good, help me, please.
I'll introduce myself, shall I?
Well, we can do that as we go, I think. But you're a playwright, an actor, a musician. You have done you've written, performed many plays, including a one-man play about Paul Robeson, about the life and times of Paul Robeson, which you've taken all over the world, including here in Portland, Oregon, one block from where I am right now. And then you're just being very summarizing very much here, just very succinctly. But now your new latest play is also about Paul Robeson, although you've done other plays about other people in the meantime. But you've come back to Paul Robeson, I think, very much in keeping with the times and events and the pandemic and a lot of other things that have been happening lately. I don't know. I want to get into that with you, but just to set the stage here, you've written this fantastic one-man, or I mean, multi-person radio play, which I actually played a role in, so I shouldn't say one man. It was definitely multi actor radio play, and it is just fantastic. And now you're in the stages of editing and mixing and thinking about how to get it out there. And I thought we could talk about it. And so there's my intro.
With yeah, well, for the benefit of those who don't know, I call Mr. Robeson is the play that I've been doing for many years, 13 years now. And I have a date, sort of movable date, currently 1st of May in London, in Greenwich Theatre. The other play that I have written is called Just an Ordinary Lawyer, based on the life of Britain's first Black judge, who was not well known, but he was a very useful vehicle through which to talk about Black liberation struggles around the world. Literally around the world. And I have in the works another play about Sierra Leonean called George Coleridge Taylor, which is who was a grandson of a very famous British composer called Samuel Coleridge Taylor. So Paul Robeson's Love Song is a play that the idea came to me about 4 years ago, and it was inspired by actually goings on here in the UK, funnily enough, and the allegations of anti-Semitism in the British Labour Party with the rise of Jeremy Corbyn. And he has very wrongly, I am quite sure about that, been tainted with with that brush, really as the only way he could be prevented from getting into power, which the powers that be have actually succeeded in doing. But I got the idea. I saw parallels between what was happening with Jeremy Corbyn with what happened to Paul Robeson, in that somebody who is very, very popular, speaks truth to power, very much a socialist, a campaigner for peace and justice around the world, is a real threat to the powers that be. And they find anything they can, they throw everything at them to prevent them from their voices being heard. Paul Robeson, communism was the main thing. With Jeremy Corbyn, anti-Semitism. And in both cases, well, Paul Robeson was certainly communist orientated, even if it wasn't not necessarily in the party. With Jeremy Corbyn, it was untrue, quite frankly, and but it stuck, and so the Labour Party lost election, and we are suffering for that right now.
It's continuing, this kind of fight within the Labour Party over supposed anti-Semitism that just generally seems to be completely false allegations.
Yes, and what, in my opinion, has happened is that the Labour Party has been taken over, and it is in the process of being completely destroyed. I put no, it's just as simple as that. It's being destroyed. It's hemorrhaging members and money, and the person in charge is now to the right of the Tory party. And it's, whoever came up with the idea, I'm sure it succeeded beyond their wildest expectations. But to go back to Paul Robeson,
I mean, it's so interesting to hear that actually Jeremy Corbyn and British politics was one of your main inspirations for writing about this particular, this particular play, about this particular incident in the life of Paul Robeson, because, I mean, it could very easily have been written based on things that have been going on here in the past few years.
Exactly. And, the same, I mean, even Bernie Sanders, who is Jewish, was
yeah, right. They would call him an anti-Semite if they could do it more easily.
yeah, and he was accused of being anti-Semitic. Here in the UK, there are, I don't know, dozens of Jewish members of the Labour Party who have been expelled and suspended from the Labour Party on anti-Semitism allegations. So that is, it's quite ridiculous. And some of them have actually taken the party to court and recently won a judgment against the party. So it's quite shocking. So with Paul Robeson's love song, I mean, a number of ideas had been floating around in my mind for years. For me, Paul Robeson represents one of the most, I'm told not to use the word seminal, iconic.
Why not seminal?
It's apparent.
Now that you've said you're not supposed to use it, we need to discuss the word seminal. Does it remind people of semen? I mean, this is what my first thing that comes to mind. Why wouldn't we use the word seminal? Because does it sound like a sexual reference, or is it no?
It's not what's the word, gender neutral.
It is based on semen, huh? I never even I always thought this word is a little weird, but it does. Okay, now.
Yeah.
If anybody else didn't know, seminal comes from semen. Now they know. So what's a better word? Root. Okay, root. Yeah. Good.
But Paul Robeson, the events that happened surrounding Paul Robeson in Peekskill in 1949 unknown to most people, but for me, the most fundamental, the turning point in modern American history, because on those 2 days, August 28th and September 4th, he was to have a concert outdoors to raise money for the New York chapter of the Civil Rights Congress. And on both occasions, there were riots. People didn't want him to sing. And this was because the April 1949, he had made a speech in Paris in which he talked about African Americans not fighting for the US because they were second-class citizens in the US, fighting against the Soviet Union, where in his experience and the experience of minorities, they were treated with great dignity and equality. But that was the excuse that the authorities needed to paint him as anti-American. And by the time he got back, he was public enemy number one. And that was the parallel that I saw with Jeremy Corbyn, who I am clearly a great fan of. But there are millions of people out there who see him as literally a hate figure.
Yeah.
That was the inspiration, but I mean, nobody would know that from seeing the play. So the play, Paul Robeson's Love Song, is set in a recording studio, where it's a fictionalization of the recording of an album over several months. So in the play, I sing 4 songs. We have 3 studio sessions, and then there's one record at the end. And but it spans sort of June 1948 or December 48 to sometime in 1950. So it spans his great popularity, time of great popularity. Peak skill happens in the background, and he comes back for the final recording session in the studio, which is owned by a Jewish man, and they're great friends. But by the end of the play, he has turned against Paul Robeson like the rest of American society has. And there's a little bit of personal stuff in there with his wife, and the wife of the record company owner clearly being very attracted to Paul Robeson and not hiding it very much. So there's a bit of tension there. And I contacted people that I had come across on my travels in the US and Canada, you included, and you very kindly provided the technical platform for all of us to call in and record. And so it's and you played a heavy one of his guards at peak skill, and I must say you had a really menacing voice.
I'm glad I can be menacing.
I didn't realize that when you listen to somebody that that's what comes. But no, it's been a really interesting experience. I actually pitched the play to the BBC about years ago.
Pitched the idea. So when did you first write the play? And by the way, we are now joined by my co-host for the broadcast from Australia, where it's very early in the morning. Here's Paula. So we now have three people in 3 different countries, all of us from former British colonies.
Yes, that is true. Morning, David.
Good morning.
I made it.
But
I'm going to do this.
Tayo, the whole environment around the radio play and that the depiction of the riots in Peekskill and Paul Robeson's efforts to perform there and being opposed by this racist anti-communist mob. I mean, the echoes of today and the people in power egging on this kind of conflict, and then it being sort of it being carried out in the streets in these kinds of forms, in the form of an attempted lynching of a popular musician. And I mean, the whole it just has so many echoes to today in the U.S. and I just wonder if that's something that was like going through your mind as you're writing, or as anywhere in the process.
Well, I'll tell you, another inspiration for the play was your last president.
Yeah.
Who actually gets whose voice we hear toward the end of the play. So the play is actually set in modern times on a specific date, actually August 28th last year. And that the opening scene of the play, you hear Democracy Now! Broadcasting the news about James Blake and the riots in Kenosha, Wisconsin. So it is set with this brother and sister in Kenosha talking about their late, their mother has just died, and they happen to be the grandchildren of the record company owner that Paul Robeson was recorded in. And the story unfolds that way. But at the very last time we hear this sibling couple, in the same broadcast, August 28th, we hear the last president talking about the GOP will be the party that will stand up for those American patriots and so on. And this is before the election. And one of the lines that I loved the most about it from the play was when the brother George, played by Bob Wyke in Philadelphia, says, "God, I don't get these Democrats." If it had been Bernie with AOC or, say, Elizabeth Warren, then it would be in the back. I'm still not sure if Biden will win. So, yeah, it's so the parallels and both the parallels and the links between then and now are quite obvious, and I like to think that they're used effectively in the play.
Yeah, I think so. I think everybody will agree when they eventually get around to seeing it as well. But
Hearing it,
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never written a radio play before, but interestingly, I had always been told that Call Mr. Robeson would work well on radio.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And anybody living in Britain or just generally exposed to BBC would think in terms of radio plays, I'd think, because there's so many radio plays on BBC. I don't know.
Exactly, yeah.
What got you to think about doing it as a radio play? I just assumed in my ignorance that was inspired by the pandemic, but it was a pre-pandemic idea.
Oh yeah, very much so. Yes, it was. Funnily enough, I was introduced online to a radio drama producer called Martin Jenkins, very experienced, very respected radio producer. And they suggested doing a Paul Robeson play. And I said, oh, I'll adapt Call Mr. Robeson for radio. But he suggested writing something completely different. And I came up with an idea similar to what I have now, and we sent a one-page thing to the commissioners. This was about 12 years ago. But it just so happened that somebody even more famous was writing a radio play at the same time. And so that didn't work out. And then
Now, what do you mean by that? When you say someone even, because people are writing radio plays all the time, but you're talking about somebody.
a famous playwright in the UK called Linda Grant.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, she was writing a Paul Robeson play. At the same time.
Specifically on Paul Robeson.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
Okay. That's a bit of an overlap. Yeah.
Yes, very unfortunate for me. I listened to it, and it was interesting. It was centered around an alleged. Well, no, I don't think it was alleged. A relationship that he had with an English woman that almost led to him and Essie, his wife, divorcing. So that was it. I don't remember the title, but it was Yolanda. I think it might even have been Paul and Yolanda, something like that. And then since then, there's another famous British actor and writer called Lenny Henry, who wrote his own radio play on Paul Robeson, centering on his surveillance by the FBI. That was maybe about 7 years ago. And then I pitched mine 2 years ago, but it was turned down. And I would like to think that the reason, no, it's not that I would like to think, I suspect that the reason is the fact that it touches or it centers on anti-Semitism. Because Peekskill was not just an anti-communist and anti-Black riot, it was specifically anti-Semitic as well. So, and that's partly because Peekskill was probably still is a place that Jewish people used to go to in the summer holidays in large numbers. And so, local people objected. So, and Paul Robeson was, his wife and his daughter, son, sorry. His wife was partly Jewish. His son married a Jewish woman. Paul Robeson himself spoke Yiddish and Hebrew. He was very much a lover of Jewish people. So the anti-Semitism that surrounded him was very personal, but it was in society, as it is here in the UK now. But the accusations of anti-Semitism are being directed in the wrong directions. And in the US, the wrong people are being accused of being anti-Semitic, really to divert attention from the people who are really doing the oppressing.
It's such a familiar pattern that you depict so well in the play, and that just plays itself out in the UK and Australia and the United States in so many different forms just in the past few years that it's just impossible to find enough good allegories to talk about, really.
I'm ashamed to say that I haven't heard much about allegations of anti-Semitism in Australia, Paula.
No. I follow anarchist on Instagram, and he summed it up, I think, a few weeks ago. He put up a post that started with, "Yay, more neoliberalism." So, all of this stuff, there's a lot of parallels here, and we have a massively neoliberal government who my partner describes our prime minister as Trump light, which is a good description. And but can we talk about importing slaves from New Caledonia to work in the sugar plantations? Can we talk about being a penal colony and having indentured servitude? All of those. So, I don't know that anti-Semitism is kind of the same problem here as it is in other places. But, our Labor Party is imploding, has been for years. And partly because of that, it's a very similar, caucus factional infighting. It's a very similar structure to the British Labor Party, and it's imploding for some of the same reasons. And you know, that whole anti-Semitism accusation was obviously a political stab at Jeremy Corbyn, and we haven't had anybody like that within the Labor Party, really. So it sort of hasn't come up, but you know, our politics are always interconnected to both countries, to the US and to the UK, and we get a sort of, you know, milder version of all of these things. You know, Thatcherism here is a, you know, was represented by Howard, and you know, so a lot of it's much more buried, and it hasn't got to the point of avert social conflict like it has in England or in the US. But it's all there. Yeah.
I was in Adelaide at the Fringe 2013, 2015, I don't remember.
Yes, that's right. You were, yeah.
First time in Australia. And I remember the first impression I got was, wow, this place is not only so white.
I know.
I saw little evidence of the Aboriginal people, the original people. And to me, that is almost a totally successful genocide. I remember seeing 2 Aboriginal people in a shopping mall looking scared, just looking scared being there, you know, as though they shouldn't be there. And this is their land. And I thought, oh my goodness.
Yes, that's right. And Adelaide is particularly what Roxanne Dunbar-Otis calls settler colonialism, because unlike Sydney or Melbourne, it's not a penal colony. You know, it was your classic kind of frontier agriculture settlement, and yes, the Ghana people were essentially wiped out. The language was the last actual native speaker of Ghana died in 1921, and there's a project here to resurrect the language. It's been going on for a long time, and it comes from, you know, there's a whole bunch of interesting things about it, but the only primary source they've got to go on is from some German missionaries, Lutheran missionaries, who put together a dictionary. So, you know, there's lots of complicated linguistics involved in that. But Adelaide, yes, like I first moved to Adelaide when I was 19, and I grew up in Melbourne, inner city Melbourne. So I grew up in an environment where you know, white people were definitely minority, like people from English-speaking backgrounds. Were, you know, maybe 10% of the population. You know, everybody was from all over the world.
Right.
And so when I first moved to Adelaide, I had trouble with that, with how assimilated it is. You know, everybody assimilates very quickly here, partly because it's I think the German influence, the Northern European influence. But it's got less so over the years because we've had quite a large African refugee population, migrant population come in. So that's nice. The food's better, you know. But yes, your impression of Adelaide is someone Rushdie said when he visited Adelaide, he felt like he had this strange double vision going on because it looked so straight on the surface, but then people kept telling him about, you know, the weirdo serial killers and you know, the weird underground stuff that happens here as well. It's a strange place.
I wonder, Tayo, what other thoughts do you have on your experiences in different former British colonies, or that you've because you've traveled internationally and performed quite a bit, and there are similarities and differences that I've noticed.
And you're from Nigeria, aren't you?
That's right. That's right. You know, which.
So you've got a classic story there because you were an architect, didn't you? Weren't you, when you moved to Liverpool?
Yeah. But no, I became I moved to Liverpool I moved to England when I was 16 and to Liverpool in 1989. So I qualified here in Liverpool as an architect and practiced for many years until a series of bad luck events, one of which was corruption in high places, I'm pretty sure.
Mm.
And the fact that my skin color didn't get me the help that I needed to produce the work that I wanted to produce. I gave up. I decided to just give up and tell the Paul Robeson story.
Mm.
I didn't realize it was going to be so lonely, and financially not lucrative, but it's been joyful. It really has been 12, 13, 20, whatever, how many years of just constant upliftment, and for me, and watching that in audiences. I've performed in Australia, in different parts of Canada, including as far north as Inuvik, which is a few degrees north of the Arctic Circle, in November. And I thought, if my mother could see me now. I performed
from Nigeria.
I performed. One of the very interesting memories is actually in Harare, Zimbabwe, the Harare International Theatre Festival for the Arts, HIFA, where I performed Just an Ordinary Lawyer. I literally was there for 2 days. Flew in, got to the airport, got driven from the airport downtown. I saw no white people, and I thought, well, this is a white, this white people settled here. Halfway through, I started seeing some so-called colored people, i.e. mixed people, and then downtown, where the vast majority of people were African, but you saw quite a few white people. No, a few white people. I thought, where are all these white people? The next day I did the rehearsal. So the pianist was a white guy who actually was the director of the festival. And then the play came on, and I went on stage, and the whole bloody audience was white, practically.
Wow.
Oh, dear.
And so what happened was the white settlers live on the hills in the fertile areas, plush. And then they are the ones who can afford to drive in, take in a play, and drive back out.
Wow.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So stark.
It really was mind-blowing. And then I left. I thought, my goodness, I haven't been to South Africa yet. I've tried.
And that's Zimbabwe. And that was Zimbabwe during, recent years. I mean, this is Zimbabwe under liberated.
After Mugabe. Just after Mugabe had been toppled.
Right.
So that was
after decades of Mugabe being in power, who was supposedly the liberator of Zimbabwe, and you can see why there's still so much conflict there.
That's right. But
which is a very similar story to South Africa, because as Hugh Masekela said, they gained, political power without gaining any economic power.
That's
right. And if you don't get control of the economy, then the people in charge are still the same people, essentially. Right. Yeah.
And
what about other places you've performed in Africa? Is it like that anywhere in Nigeria, where you could just find yourself performing for an entirely white audience like that?
Not an entirely white audience, but an entirely wealthy audience.
Right.
So
if an audience were entirely wealthy, would that would it still be at least mostly Black Africans, or no?
Almost entirely. Almost entirely. Nigeria was never settled by white people, but in our situation, when the white oppressors left, the Black oppressors took over.
Yeah,
as we saw that reach the depth last October 20th, when people who were peacefully protesting corruption and the failed state, very peacefully in huge numbers, were machine gunned by the army.
Yeah.
And so they have retreated. But I'm hopeful that the protests will start again, and that they may take inspiration from what's going on in India, in Myanmar.
It's amazing what's happening in both India and Myanmar, but I've heard also in Nigeria that there have been people coming back to that toll plaza where
Yes.
they're trying to reopen the toll plaza.
Yeah, but they tried, about a week ago, and as soon as they got there, they were arrested and taken and brutalized in the jails. But hopefully they'll go back, because that toll plaza is a real cash cow for the Lagos state government, and they found the way, just like the Montgomery bus boycott. You hit them where it hurts most, in their pockets, and they take notice. But sadly, we have administrations in Nigeria and other parts of Africa, and as you see in Myanmar, that cared nothing for the lives of their citizens.
Yes.
And then you've also performed quite a bit in the countries that were, in the former colonies that had centuries of whites only immigration policies, like Australia, New Zealand, the United States, Canada, and I wonder. I wonder if just what comes to mind as far as like comparisons between the different countries that you've performed in, like similarities and differences in terms of the former colonies. I mean, having performed in so many former colonies, it's really quite a perspective, I think, that you have there.
I guess so. Yeah.
That Paul Robeson also had. Yeah.
Him too. Speaking of people with a lot of perspective who performed in a lot of countries.
Exactly. It's always nice to have, I always say that Paul Robeson's life was up there and mine is kind of down there, but parallel.
Yes, absolutely.
A parallel trajectory, just not as grandiose.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I've
been thinking about them.
Yeah, and interestingly, if anybody hasn't seen it, they should watch YouTube footage of Paul Robeson and Australian Broadcasting Corporation, where he's interviewed by these three white people.
Yeah.
He gives a master class on the colonial history. He said at some point, you just came here and took it. In Africa, we're trying to, I don't remember it, but it was brilliant.
It's beautiful. And there's a great YouTube footage of him singing Joe Hill for the workers outside the Sydney Opera House, which was still being built. Yeah. And I want to perform here, but I can't get in. I'm just going to perform for everybody. And it's a mesmerizing video, because he had all of those people mesmerized. It's just great. Yeah. I love it. It's one of my favorites.
First ever person to perform at the Sydney Opera House.
That's exactly right.
And
he wasn't performing for the rich white people who go to the theatre. He was performing for the people building it.
And he specifically said that, he talked about that at the time, right? He said, you people building this opera house probably are never going to be coming to hear performances in it. So I just thought I'd give you a little taste of what you're going to be missing. Something like that.
Yes. And this is something he knew, that it's like your experience in Zimbabwe. Ordinary people, working class people, don't go to the theatre. You have to go where they are. Like Ngugi wa Thiong'o did, who went back and relearned his own language and then started putting on plays in his communities, and people walked for days to come and see it, right? That kind of, a lot of, that's the other side of African culture, I think, is you're not going to find it in the big posh theaters, right? Just like it's the same here. It's the same in the US. The working class people here don't go to the theater. Who goes to the theater? It's very hard to convince them to go to the theatre. You know, you have to approach it differently in a way that they relate to. So, yeah.
Kind of sad because theaters are really nice. Like, don't you like
Oh,
performing in theaters, Tayo? I mean, isn't it like the best
Yes,
place to perform is like a nice theater, like
yes,
with good
so
lights? And
yes, with the sound, the proper sound, and I mean, I love the theatre, right? And I'm a working class person who happens to go to the theatre, right? And gets involved in it, and I've done a lot of community theatre, all that kind of thing. One of the reasons that I've been in love with Paul Robeson since I was about 10 was because I went to a play at a beautiful theatre in Melbourne called the Athenaeum, and it was called Deep Bell's Ring, right? And I don't actually remember too much of it, except that it was about Paul Robeson, and then after that, I just went looking for him. That's my first conscious memory of, because it was his songs and story. It was a bunch of actors, doing a sort of it was sort of biographical, I suppose. Yeah.
Two things about Paul Robeson in Australia. When he went there in 1960, he went looking for Aboriginal people.
Yes, he did.
And people. I didn't meet anyone who had met him, but they still talk about that this huge star came looking for them and calling them his brothers.
Yes.
Yes, when I was in Adelaide, I went on a march. It was February, so there was a march. I don't remember. It was a trade union march, and I met a woman who invited me to the Adelaide Community Centre. Anyway, and that's where I saw Aboriginal people.
Yes.
And I got complimentary tickets for some of them to come see the show. And I remember seeing this man who I call Uncle, I forget his name now, but sitting at the back of the theater. It wasn't a theater, it was a pub. As a fringe venue, and just saw him crying, and I just felt, I felt, I've done a good thing here. I hope, because he wouldn't have come there of his own volition.
No,
he probably wouldn't have felt welcome. But we touched each other, and that was
yes.
So, I think I probably wouldn't have done that if I didn't know about the kinds of things that Paul Robeson himself did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your question about colonies, maybe I would contrast it with Jamaica, the place that I went to. Jamaica, populated by descendants of slaves completely. But very strangely enough, I was actually invited there by the U.S. Embassy to Jamaica.
They would never, the U.S. Embassy would never organize a show for you anywhere in the United States, I'm sure. But in Jamaica, of course, it's a different thing, right? And they want to make you look like, okay, look, we're all into, we're cool, hip, great.
And they had done that in Lagos once. And this lady who invited me very graciously made a speech at the beginning to say, we work for the State Department, the same State Department that canceled Paul Robeson's passport and prevented him from traveling. And we are, glad to be bringing Tayo here to tell his story. And the same in Kingston. But there I saw, and then the ambassador there was black, the high staff were all black. But it still felt to me, as we were being driven around in these bulletproof Jeeps, that, this is...
Yeah.
The fact that we're black doesn't mean that we are, everybody has the same experience. It was still a sort of, it felt to me like colonialism, neocolonialism.
It's still class.
But I was
class.
But I really enjoyed Kingston. I was very impressed. I think it compares favorably against Lagos, where I grew up. Just just seemed to work more. That's because it's very much a smaller country and a smaller city.
Yes.
Lagos is just huge and almost unworkable.
Yeah.
And where else have I performed?
Well, the U.S., Canada, and Australia, New Zealand have been there.
Yes.
Quite different from Australia, I would note.
Yes. But they're terribly English over there.
What's that?
Terribly English over there.
Oh, very English. They're more English in New Zealand than
That's right.
especially Christchurch. That was the most English part of New Zealand, I think.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. When Alistair Hewlett said when he moved there in 1968, the older women of Christchurch generally wore those white gloves, like thin white gloves before going out. And the hats. And
when
New Zealand was settled by Scottish and Irish people who got to Australia and went, oh, it's way too hot over here. I'm going to New Zealand, which is like home.
Yeah. And when I got
there, it is very English. Yes.
There was I think it was an England Test match going on, so even more English.
Yeah. Yes.
And Tayo, what about
what
about the logistics of attempting to? I mean, you did mention that you got turned down by BBC, but I mean about the logistics of trying to put out a radio play in the era of the internet and Murdoch, and I mean it's just what a media landscape or lack of landscape, depending, or just the internet where everything is going on. And I mean you put in so much work into this, into writing and producing and putting this thing out, and then what happens to it then is that's kind of your current dilemma at this point in the
well, it's
process.
not a dilemma. It's just going to happen. The question is the best way of making it happen. I had originally hoped it would be out before the U.S. elections, thinking stupidly that it might contribute to people voting the right way. Or anyway, it didn't happen.
It would have.
It would have. I'm sure that. Sure Biden would have gotten at least 5 more votes.
And then I thought,
could have done with them.
Yeah, I thought, well, maybe the inauguration, and then I thought, well, it's coming out, but now that it is done, it's being edited and mastered by my daughter, who actually is a Guardian journalist on audio, so it's going to be as good as it can possibly be for something recorded over the internet from people's closets. But
blanket forts. I liked the blanket forts.
Yeah, yeah, we got good at blankets. Yeah.
But I'm going to release it on April 9th, which is
you definitely have a release date, April 9th, everybody.
April
okay 9th. And then, but you don't know where you're releasing it.
I don't know where yet.
But that's the date.
The ideal would be in collaboration with the Democracy Now, the left-wing news program.
If anybody associated with Democracy Now is watching, let's emphasize that point. We are hoping the ideal debut place would be Democracy Now. Okay, all you current or former Democracy Now producers who may or may not be watching, who have friends who are current or former Democracy Now producers, please tell them that somebody needs to talk to Amy Goodman and tell her how wonderful this radio play is, and that it needs to debut on Democracy Now. Okay,
thank you
please. Just wanted to make sure that point was emphasized as much as possible.
Amy's voice is part of the soundscape anyway, and
that's right.
She's in it. we are amplifying each other's voices, hopefully.
Yes.
But then all, whatever radio stations, internet stations, whatever, I'm still trying to work out a way of,
getting it out there.
Some of the people have agreed, like you, David, have done it for the love of it. Other actors, can't afford to do it, for free. So we need to be paid, but I don't want to make it. So I'm thinking of just making it, available for $1 a pound, and then donations on top, or $5 a pound, whatever. But we're, the next few weeks we're going to work it out, and I'm also hoping that, I have an idea that we could make it a joint fundraiser with Democracy Now. Offer it somehow to their supporters. But I'm open to ideas. And David, you've always got a lot of great ideas, so I'm sure.
That's the best idea. That's the best one. I hope that's my favorite of the possible ideas that anyone has had so far. Anyway, in terms of marketing.
There's NPR. There's all.
Yes, I was thinking NPR would be another one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I think if anybody associated with alternative radio and David Barsamian or New York Public Radio, those are my favorite other options, other than debuting on Democracy Now. If you were to,
yeah.
And what about in Britain? Is there any any particular plans for a British debut, or is it just basically internet generally?
It's internet generally. There's a festival here in the UK. I bumped into one of the directors in the park the other day, who said, "Oh, let's talk about it." So we might feature it on a local festival as an online thing, but it'll happen here, there, and everywhere. I haven't just quite worked out the logistics yet. So, I have the writing hat, the performing hat, and the editing hat. So the marketing is the next thing. So any help I can have, I'll be very grateful for.
But it's nice to have a date in mind. And April 9th is the date, because that was the actual day of Paul Robeson's scheduled concert at Peekskill.
No, April 9th is his birthday.
His birthday.
April 9th, 1898. Yeah.
Nice. My birthday's April 10th, so that's easy to remember.
Right.
Yeah.
Peekskill was August 28th, with the concert that had to be abandoned, and then he went back on September 4th, held the concert and retreated, and that's in the play. The fact that they had to leave before getting to the concert. So September 4th, 1949, to me, is a date that people should know.
Yeah.
Because that, to me, was as close as the US got to fascism before the last few years.
Would you talk about that? What is the takeaway from September 4th, 1949? I mean, that's it. That was because basically this was the fascists were basically in the streets controlling a town with the cooperation of the police, and they nearly lynched one of the most popular performers of the day.
Yes. I mean, that's pretty damn serious. But the point was that it wasn't just because that he was a popular performer. This was a guy who, in my opinion, if he had been listened to, if his message had been heard, then we need to have peaceful collaboration with the Soviet Union. We need to have peaceful cooperation with Europe. We need to embrace socialism. We need to have equality. We need to have peace. Instead of hearing any of that, they said this guy is a communist, and he wants to overthrow a country with violence. Attack. And going back to what I started with, that, in my opinion, is exactly what has happened to people like Bernie Sanders, and to a greater extent, Jeremy Corbyn. These people want wars to stop. They want hedge funds to stop. They want the health services to be funded. They want, oh no, he's anti-Semite, attack. And now he's out of the picture. We have a government which almost as badly as in the US, has caused tens of thousands of deaths by not just incompetence, but greed. Giving the PPI contracts to friends who have nothing to do with healthcare. Just the fact that they donated to the Tory party. That's corrupt.
Wow.
Yes.
That's also
that's
here
happening
a lot
here
in a
too.
big way. Oh, in Australia too.
Oh yeah, heaps.
And here that's a very bipartisan tradition, as probably anybody should know who pays attention to either Democratic or Republican dominated media
Yep.
in this country.
Back to business
Corruption.
as usual now. Yeah.
Yeah. So the takeaway from September 4th. I mean, and then what about in terms of the what about in terms of the whole question of incitement and speech, and in the in the wake of the Capitol riots and Trump losing his Twitter account? I mean, that also seems very relevant.
Oh yeah, very much so. I mean,
Blacklisted.
yeah.
I mean, not that I'm saying he shouldn't have had his Twitter account taken away. I'm not necessarily advocating that he should have a platform on Twitter, but it is I mean, the whole question is very relevant, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's. I mean, the question is whose voices get to be heard, and who controls the means of access to the airwaves. So this, I mean, I didn't understand, for instance, what was going on Facebook in Australia, but I saw a lovely tweet today. I don't know who it was, that explained that the real problem was the fact that Murdoch was being threatened. The Murdoch empire is being threatened by the Facebook empire. And so
Yes.
this was a war between those two, and
Pretty
not
much.
really about the rest of the population's access to information.
No.
When elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers,
Yes.
So that's the whole point. It's the news we get is controlled, filtered by people whose interests the rest of us have to continue to suffer and labor. And
Yes.
that's just
Basically.
and the problem is that few people have the opportunity to not only find this thing out or understand it, but the chorus is against us is so loud, but occasionally the voice gets through and causes can make great change. So even Twitter and Facebook can be used against the oligarchs.
And I guess
it's
just
not the
as
technology, it's how you use it. Yeah.
Just to chime in with my own random historical comment on the relevance of the period too, in terms of what was happening with with speech at the time, was like this was McCarthy's anti-communist campaign was really kicking off by, like, I believe 48, right? So by 49 it was in, I mean, it's associated with the 50s, but it was started in the late 40s, and this whole campaign to sort of reassert the dominance of the sort of colonialist capitalist narrative after this brief period when it was fashionable to be against fascism in the United States. And
very
then
brief period.
Yeah, very brief period and then the sort of more forces of basically oppression reasserted themselves, and that mob in Peekskill was very much part of that whole. And they were being egged on by very much by very powerful voices. Well, at the very top,
and
being incited to riot.
Yeah, and the papers, the local papers. Very interestingly, 2019, 2 years ago, I did a performance of Call Mr Robeson in Peekskill on around the 70th anniversary. And I forget the name of the paper. I was actually interviewed by this reporter, and front page news of Peekskill September 2nd, 3rd, or 4th, September 1st, I think was the day I performed, was a headline saying Paul Robeson caused concert in Peekskill 1949. That was the front page of a local paper.
Wait, Paul Robeson caused what?
Riot.
Oh, riot.
In Peekskill, September 1949.
They're saying this 70 years later. The headline is that Paul Robeson caused the riot.
Something like that. It's a slight paraphrase, but
yeah. The
yeah.
Robeson-inspired riot, perhaps. Whatever the phrase they used is just the Robeson caused. That's amazing. Wow.
It's really frightening. It's really frightening.
Yes.
It's amazing.
And this guy interviewed me, and we didn't speak. He asked me questions, and I submitted them. Yeah. So the press, I think the press and their owners so powerful and so dangerous sometimes. But
and then Facebook, also so scary and dangerous. And then between the two of them, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
It's all corporate media,
Social media. So algorithms of conflict and hatred. But so April 9th on sorry?
It's corporate, I think social media is a misnomer because it's owned by a guy, right?
Yeah.
He does
billionaires.
This is the whole point about the new Australia Facebook conflict.
Yeah.
Mark Zuckerberg owns it. He can do what he likes.
It's a conflict between billionaires. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It wasn't in his economic interests, So he went, I'm going to do what's in my economic interests.
That's right.
And Murdoch went, no, but that's not in my economic interest. And here we are,
But it sounded as though it was the government of Australia that was
yes, because
siding with Murdoch.
Right? That's what
Murdoch's government.
Murdoch's been manipulating governments for a very, very long time now, and it's much easier for him to manipulate the Australian government because
he's still a local.
He owns all the money.
No matter what, he can pretend to be an American, but the Australians all know he's one of theirs.
Yeah, and they depend on him. The Murdoch press here is very tightly intertwined with the Australian government.
Well, they either depend on him or they're terrified of him. One or the other, right? Or
that's
both.
right. So, and that's classic. That's how politicians work, right?
Yeah.
So yes, it was all. Personally, I thought it was hilarious because if I want news, I don't look at those places.
Right.
I follow all these other things. My partner follows the Guardian newsfeed.
Yeah, but for society, it's terrifying. The whole thing.
Yeah,
but
the implications are probably, but it's kind of being worked out now.
April 9th, Tayo Aluko and Friends.com. Yes. We don't know where exactly the release is happening. Hopefully on some very large global radio platform. But in any case, people can go to tayoalukoandfriends.com and find out where it's happening soon. And in any case, for sure, by April 9th or well before April 9th, you'll be able to go there and find out where the debut is going on and where you can buy, download a copy and donate and support the project. I know you got a Patreon page, which we're going to work on cultivating there, but look up Tayo Aluko on Patreon and tayoalukoandfriends.com and download this radio play. It's fantastic. If it's going to cost $1, it's so worth your buck, and hopefully you can pay, donate a bit more. Hopefully it's going to be a flexible donation kind of thing where people can donate more than $1, because it sure required a heck of a lot of work from inception to recording to mixing to everything else. It's a really people have no idea out there what's involved with this stuff.
It's a labor of love, but I'm pretty sure it will inspire people. And I came to Paul Robeson because somebody heard me sing and said I reminded her of Paul Robeson. I hadn't heard of him before that. And
Yes.
that one conversation has taken me around the world. So if
you sound so much like Paul Robeson.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
So just the idea that people will hear this play and also be inspired is,
Yes.
you know, I just had to do it, you know.
Yeah.
Regardless.
Yeah, that's definitely the only reason to do these things in the first place, isn't it? Right? Because nobody becomes a left-wing playwright to get rich and famous, huh? Or at least if they do, they're really deluded.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, this has been a great pleasure, and we should probably stop before we lose people. I'm told that an hour is already too long, and I should I should be doing half-hour interviews, but that half hour always seems too short. So, but
yeah,
you know,
I think an hour is good.
I think so.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tayo.
It's been great, Tayo. Thank you so much.
And you guys are just meeting. That's good. Okay.
Yeah,
good.
Yes.
Thank you.
We have been talking, but via chat. So
good.
It's nice to meet you in person.
Yes, we'll meet,
And if
in Adelaide or in the UK someday.
And if
in
people want
actual
to,
person would be wonderful.
Inshallah.
ideally, yes. Hopefully the borders all come down and we all start touring again.
Yeah.
And if people want to see this broadcast after the fact, they will be able to find it easily enough on Tayo Aluko's Facebook page, I'm sure, as well as on my Facebook page, Song News Network's Facebook page, my YouTube channel. And also, if you look for This Week with David Rovics, wherever you get your podcasts, you can find it in podcast form on Spotify and iTunes and Google and everywhere else. And thanks everybody out there.
On Song News Network YouTube page.
Oh, excellent. Song News Network YouTube page, and go to songnewsnetwork.com. No, org.
It's .org. Yes.
.org. Songnewsnetwork.org. And
but also you can just put Song News Network in the search on YouTube.
Yeah. Oh yeah, YouTube too. Yeah. All these different platforms, and they'll take us down from some of them, but not all of them. And somehow or another, we'll continue to find a way to communicate. And remember, mutual aid will get us through. Trust your neighbors. Talk to y'all soon. Bye for now.